Scotland in 1885 was deep in the throngs of an economic depression. British wars in foreign lands along with the Irish famine had placed a continual tax drain on the British people. Businesses were failing and jobs were scarce.
So many people were immigrating to the States, Canada, and other parts of the British Empire.
On the west coast of Florida, the area known as Sarasota was a part of Manatee County. The area had long been home to Indian tribes and pioneer settlers, families such as the Whitakers, the Webbs, the Knights, and the Tuckers made their homes along the pristine waters of the bay between Hudson Bayou and Philippi Creek. Hearing about the wonders of Florida, a prominent Scotsman named John Selwyn Tate convinced several other wealthy Scots to invest in a 60,000-acre tract in Manatee County. The land was purchased from Henry Diston, sight unseen. Tate was noted for his newspaper writing encouraging immigration to America. He persuaded Scotsman Sir John Gillespie, the Archbishop of Canterbury, and the Dean of Edinburgh to join his venture for a new colony to be founded in Florida. The colony would be a first-class operation and was to be called the Ormiston Colony, so named after an estate of Sir John Gillespie located near Edinburgh. Operating as the Florida Mortgage and Investment Company, the group promised grand opportunities to those who would invest in their 60,000-acre paradise.
To sell this piece of paradise, Mr. Tate created a brochure which promoted the healthiest and most beautiful place on all this earth.
Each purchaser paid 100 pounds sterling for a 40-acre farm and a town lot in the earthly paradise of Sarasota. The contracts were signed, the deal made, and the money paid after the buyers sold virtually all they owned at auction. Among them was the Browning family.
My grandfather and great-grandfather were people of the trades, some very persuasive gentlemen who had bought land in Sarasota and convinced them that the right place to go was Sarasota, so that's where they headed.
It was late November 1885. The harsh Scottish winter was upon them as they arrived at Glasgow to board the steamer SS Furnesia and set sail for New York. On November 25, 1885, the 68 adults and children boarded the steamer to begin their trip to paradise.
The great ship warped away from the dock into midstream, and its engines started ahead at slow speed. Soon the solid skyline ashore became less as buildings got more scattered and the dry docks appeared. Alex Browning, 19 years old.
The voyage was rough and stormy as they crossed through the freezing climate of the North Sea. Unaccustomed to seafaring, many became ill. One person died on board. After more than 2 weeks at sea, on December 10, 1885, 4 days overdue, the SS Furnesia pulled into port in New York City. Here, the colonists would rest before continuing their journey to paradise.
I felt I had suddenly been projected into a new world. Of course I had. The rush of everyone and everything made an overwhelming impression.
Within a few days, they boarded the steamer State of Texas of the Mallory Line, bound for Fernandina, Florida on the East Coast. After a few days at sea, they began to shed their winter clothes as the temperature grew warmer. Upon reaching Fernandina, they had their first view of the wonders of the tropics.
Never having seen vegetation like this in its wild state appealed to our imagination about parrots and monkeys or savages.
In Fernandina, the sojourners boarded a train for the cross-country trip to Cedar Key on Florida's west coast.
This was a rocky ride, noisy and dusty in the extreme. On the newly laid narrow-gauge railroad tracks, the cars being correspondingly small and uncomfortable.
Upon reaching Cedar Key, their journey was again delayed when they learned that the wharf and buildings in Sarasota, which Tate thought were already built, had not yet been started. After a lengthy delay, the colonists chartered a side-wheel steamer, Governor Safford, to take them to Sarasota. This voyage in December 1885 was the first for any steam vessel to the settlement of Sarasota. From Cedar Key, they traveled along the coast, passing Egmont Key Lighthouse, and finally through Big Pass into Sarasota Bay, where a landing was made at a small temporary wharf.
And when they arrived there was exactly one country store, which is a company store, that had, of all things, the only thing left in it was a barrel of crackers. That was the total staples that were available to these colonists coming from the old country.
The Whitakers were here at the time, and some of the Sarasota families took them in and helped them recover from this terrible trip and recover from their bad health that they gained on the trip.
My grandfather and great-grandfather and his family of 5 children ended up staying in a 2-compartment tent right down at the end of Main Street, right on the water.
Our camp stove was only a small kerosene arrangement, only fit to boil water with. But Mother was soon busy at a campfire, making Scotch scones and pancakes, with plenty of tea brought from home.
They adjusted to life as best they could. Lots were drawn to determine where their land would be. Before long, 6 cottages had been built by John Scott and occupied by the colonists, and they began to find their plots of land.
My grandfather, and great-grandfather rather, his lot was to get the property right at the corner of 5 Points in downtown Main Street, which is now Patrick's. In addition, they got 40 acres out west, east, near Fruitville, which was way out in the country, and there really wasn't even roads to get to it.
Some Scots began to clear their land, but they found it difficult, for they were not used to hoes, grubbing picks, and shovels.
One of the most discouraging events was the weather. It soon snowed and was the first time that anybody could recall snow in this area.
The natives thought at first the woods were on fire and ashes were being carried by the wind from the fire. It snowed quite a bit, enough to make snowballs.
The company laid out the town. The north-south ways were to be named for fruits: pineapple, lime, mango, and coconut. The east-west streets were numbered consecutively from pineapple and orange. Trees were cleared, Main Street constructed. For some, like Alex Browning, work was to be found as a carpenter. Soon, the DeSoto Hotel and a boarding house were under construction.
My grandfather was an architect. Although young, he had apprenticed a sufficient number of years to be classified as a licensed architect.
But for many of the colonists, life was not what they expected. Mosquitoes, sandflies, fleas, red bugs, and other annoyances led many to go back north and call the colony a failure.
A few of the hot-headed ones decided to call on Mr. Tate with shotguns, but he evidently got wind of it and disappeared one night. He has not been heard from since.
In 1886, a new company manager, John Hamilton Gillespie, son of Sir John Gillespie, had arrived.
When Gillespie got here, he finally began to import labor, a lot of skilled labor, in trying to build his colony up.
And he brought Scotch whiskey, which everybody loved.
Alex Browning and his father were hired to plan and build a new home for Gillespie.
The bayhead was cleared. On Block D,